it's time you looked Australians in the face and say
Order,
we
Senator
haven't
Lyons.
done enough.
It being 2 p.m. Questions. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you very much, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck. Can the Minister confirm the Morrison government placed its first order of Moderna in May, 9 months after the Trump administration had placed its Moderna orders?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. I don't have the specific date when the first order of Moderna was placed, Mr President, but what the Australian government has done is go through a process of full recognition and registration of all of the vaccines that we have utilised in the country, Mr President. We've had the opportunity to take advantage of the international experience with respect to the utilisation of the
Senator Colbeck, I have
vaccines,
Senator Gallagher on a point of order. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr President. Point of order, direct relevance. We were not asking about the registration, provisional or otherwise, by the TGA. We were asking about the original order of Moderna, the actual vaccine procurement strategy.
On the point of order, you reminded the Minister of the question. The Minister addressed part of the question in his initial response, but given that you've called for the remaining information to be directly relevant, I'm going to ask the Minister. I believe information about ordering vaccines in that case would be directly relevant, because he's directly addressed the first point you asked rather than a broader comment on vaccine strategy. I'll let you remind him of it. I'll listen to his answer carefully. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Mr President, the Moderna vaccine forms a very important of the overall vaccine strategy for this country. As I said to the chamber a moment ago, I don't have the specific date with me that the first order was placed. I'm happy to take that on notice and confirm that for the chamber, Mr President. But it forms a very important part of the overall vaccine strategy, and the way that this government has managed the introduction of new vaccines into the country has to be to ensure that we've had full data available to the country via the TGA to ensure that the vaccines that we're utilising have high levels of efficacy and are safe, Mr President. Mr President, we, through the TGA, took just 23 days to approve the utilisation of the Moderna vaccine, Mr President. So we have used all our resources to ensure that we could have access to this vaccine as quickly as it was safely possible, so that it could be incorporated into the vaccine rollout program.
Senator Gallagher, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Moderna has been administered in the United States since December last year, in France, Germany and Italy since January this year, in Singapore since March, in the UK and Canada since April and in Japan since May. Can the Minister confirm that as late as April this year, the Morrison government still hadn't even commenced discussions with Moderna to secure vaccine supplies?
Order. Senator Colbeck.
Mr President, we have at all times worked with vaccine suppliers across the globe to ensure that we have capacity to meet the demands of the vaccination rollout for the Australian people, Mr President. As I've just indicated to you, we approved the data set for the Moderna vaccine in 23 days, Mr President. We took the approach all through the rollout of this vaccine that we would utilise vaccines that were fully approved by the TGA and assessed through a TAGI so that we could guarantee to the Australian people that they were getting access to an efficacious and a safe vaccine, Mr President. We saw that as importance for vaccine confidence in the Australian community, Mr President. So we have taken every step to ensure that Australians could be confident in the vaccines that they were taking, and they went through the full and proper approval process.
Senator Gallagher, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. More than 6 million people are in lockdown in New South Wales and unable to get vaccinated as a result of the Morrison government's repeated failure to secure enough vaccine supplies. Aren't these Australians paying the price for Mr Morrison's repeated insistence that it isn't a race and that it isn't not a competition?
Senator Colbeck.
Well, Mr President, I won't apologise for ensuring that the vaccines that are available to Australians have been through a full and proper assessment and approval process, Mr President. I won't apologise for that, and nor will the government, Mr President. It is important, Mr President, to ensure that there is vaccine confidence within the Australian community that we have taken the approach that we have. Australians can be confident that the vaccines that are approved for use here in Australia have been fully approved by the TGA, Mr President, that they have the confidence of the TGA and ATAGI, and that Australians can be confident in taking up the vaccines that have been approved for the vaccine rollout in Australia. It's the Labor Party, Mr President, who continue to undermine the confidence of Australians with their negative attitude and negative tactics attacking the vaccine rollout, Mr President. Mr President, the Labor Party should be ashamed for their approach to the vaccine rollout.
I'm going to remind senators that when I'm hearing from people remotely, there needs to be extra compliance with the standing orders so I can hear the contributions. Order. Senator Small.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to a fellow Western Australian and the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Workforce, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash. Can the Minister advise the Senate how this government's plan is delivering an economic framework to help small and family businesses grow, prosper and create jobs as we chart our way out of the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Workforce, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Small for the question and acknowledge, obviously, that as a small business owner, Senator Small, like those of us on the government side of the chamber, knows that governments put in place economic frameworks that can assist business in prospering, in growing and creating more jobs for Australians. And certainly Senator Small has been successful in employing a number of Australians back at home in Western Australia. Mr President, in terms of the economic framework to assist businesses to prosper, to grow and to create more jobs, that is exactly how the Morrison government approached the recent 2021-22 budget, with the Minister for Finance, the Treasurer and the Prime Minister delivering a budget that puts in place those policies that well and truly back Australia's 3.5 million small and family businesses. Our economic measures are all about giving businesses the confidence to invest, to take on a new staff member, but also to get back to doing what they do best if they've been affected by COVID-19. Mr President, we're investing $7.2 million to improve and maintain a new employment tool contract, making it easier for small businesses to take on that new staff member, but at the same time to meet all of their obligations. We're also expanding the digital solutions with an investment of $12.7 million, which will support an additional 10,000 businesses to improve their digital capability and further encourage uptake of digital technology in small businesses. Because what has COVID-19 in particular taught us, Mr President, and that is businesses do need to have that digital capability. And of course, on the government side of the chamber, we understand that red tape, it strangles business, and that's why we are continuing to back in our deregulation agenda with $134.6 million being invested to make measures easier, to make it easier to employ people and reduce the regulatory burden for businesses of interacting with the government.
Senator Small, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, how is this government helping those Australian people who get out and have a go to keep more of what they earn?
Senator Cash.
Well, Mr President, the 2021-22 budget is continuing to support businesses to keep more of what they earn through measures that we are implementing, such as the temporary full expensing and the lost carryback arrangements. We're delivering a further $20.7 billion in tax relief to Australian businesses that back themselves and invest in their future. Mr President, what we also know is that the initial round of business tax incentives, they have been highly effective, Machinery and equipment investment has been growing at its fastest rate in 7 years. So what you see is businesses who have that capacity are out there and they're utilising the policies that the government is putting in place to back themselves and to invest back into their business. This means that the local cafe, the local construction company and even the local plumber, they've been able to utilise the policies that the Morrison government has put in place to reinvest in themselves and, again, prosper, grow, and what we're all about, creating more jobs for Australians.
Senator Small, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, how are these measures important in supporting Australian businesses, particularly in the context of the risks that those businesses face as we chart Australia's economic recovery?
Senator Cash.
Well, Mr President, the Morrison government's plan to secure Australia's recovery of course means keeping taxes low. On the Morrison government side of the chamber, it's in our DNA, lowering taxes. And certainly when you look at the estimated $320 billion worth of investment that is expected to be supported by our business tax incentives and create 60,000 jobs by the end of 2022-2023, we understand, in particular, by keeping taxes low and helping businesses keep more of what they earn, after all, it is their money, they've earned their money, we can continue to secure our economic recovery into the future. But, Mr President, I think one of the key contrasts between the Liberal Nationals government and those on the Labor side is obviously when it comes to lower taxes, because we did not take as an election policy to the last election $387 billion in higher taxes. That's the gift that the Labor Party would have given the Australian people, $387 billion in higher
Senator
taxes.
Cash. Senator Wong.
Mr President, my question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. Before the horror 2019-2020 bushfire season, Mr Morrison ignored warnings from experts and from former fire chiefs that Australia was unprepared for the dangers. Overnight, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has warned, and I quote, "The intensity, frequency and duration of fire weather events are projected to increase throughout Australia." I ask, will Mr Morrison ignore this warning too?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, Mr President, the Prime Minister has already publicly responded to the release of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 6th report. The Prime Minister has acknowledged the importance of this report, the importance of the report in continuing to inform Australia's effort in delivering emissions reductions, our successful efforts as a nation in delivering emissions reductions, and the importance of unified global action in this regard in dealing with emissions. The government, Mr President, looks forward to the opportunities that will be provided by the Conference of the Parties at Glasgow later this year to discuss the type of progress that is being made in Australia and around the world and the commitments for the future. We look forward to the fact that we can talk about Australia's emissions reduction, some 20% emission reduction since 2005. I hear the interjection from opposite saying how embarrassing. Well, by comparison, Mr President, our 20% stands alongside a 1% reduction in Canada, a 10% reduction in Japan, a 4% reduction in New Zealand, or a 13% reduction in the United States. I make those comparisons not to criticise any of those nations, Mr President, but to highlight, in fact, those opposite and those who in the debate in Australia seek to paint a proposition that Australia somehow does not achieve emissions reductions, whereas in fact our country has. Our country has, in part, of course, by the motivation of the Australian people as well, Mr President. 1 in 4 Australian households have rooftop solar, the highest rate of uptake in the world. Last year, Australia saw some 7 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity installed in our country, nearly 8 times faster than the global average per person. It is this momentum that we intend to continue to pursue, and it is absolutely our commitment to make sure we continue to meet and beat those targets in the future.
Senator Wong, a supplementary question.
The former Cabinet Minister and Coalition Senator Canavan has described the IPCC as, and I quote, a dodgy PR firm rather than a scientific body. And he has also asserted that the IPCC have, and I quote, no scientific credibility. Wow. Does Mr Morrison agree with Senator Canavan?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. And the answer to that is no. As I said in the primary answer, the Prime Minister has already responded to the IPCC report in a press conference earlier today, and as I outlined, and the government takes seriously the challenges of addressing global climate change. We take it seriously, Mr President, as a government, and it's why we're investing some $20 billion on low emissions technologies over the next decade, some $1.6 billion committed just through this 21-22 budget. It's why, in the Prime Minister's recent visit overseas, he signed partnership agreements that now see us in partnership arrangements with Singapore, Japan, Germany and the United Kingdom to deliver the low emissions technologies that the globe needs to be able to deliver and achieve net zero emissions. The 21-22 budget particularly dedicated $565 million to progress international research projects, knowing that those international projects of cooperation are the things that will actually deliver the technological changes to get the job done.
Senator Wong, a final supplementary question.
Senator Rennick has declared, and I quote, "Climate change hysteria is a cancer that must be destroyed." And I take his interjection, yep, is a cancer that must be destroyed. And Senator Rennick has also accused Australia's Bureau of Meteorology of tampering with data. Yep, and I take the interjection again. He says yep. Will Mr Morrison continue to capitulate to the extremes of the coalition party room, or will he commit to net zero by 2050?
Time for the question. Senator Rennick, interjections, particularly during questions, are inappropriate. Senator Wong, I'm calling the Senate to order. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. What the Prime Minister will do, what the government will do, is to continue to get on with implementing our policies that are making a difference in terms of reducing Australia's emissions. What the Prime Minister and the government will do, which is what you asked me, Senator Wong, is that we will make sure we continue to pursue the policies that are achieving the downwards trajectory in Australia's emissions, that we invest in the technologies that are necessary. Our technology investment roadmap, with its stretch targets to make clean hydrogen affordable, not just for Australia but around the world, to make energy storage affordable, not just in Australia but around the world, to make carbon capture and storage affordable, not just in Australia but around the world, to make low-carbon steel, low-carbon aluminium a reality, not just in Australia but around the world, to make effective soil carbon a reality, not just in Australia but around the world. I make those points. It has to be achieved around the world, Mr President. That's why we need the technology breakthroughs, because then not only can Australia reduce its emissions, but so too can other countries, particularly developing countries, through those tech breakthroughs.
Order. Again, I'm going to ask senators, wearing masks, it is hard to tell who is breaching standing orders by interjecting. So, apologies if I occasionally get it wrong. Senator McKim.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Hume. Minister, does the Minister for the Environment owe Australia's children a duty of care to provide them with a safe climate into the future?
The Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Hume.
I assume that this is the same message that the criminals this morning painted all over the front of Parliament House.
Order. Senator Hume, I won't anticipate Senator McKim, but I'll call you to make your point of order.
Thank you, President. And if you had anticipated that my point of order would be on relevance, you would be entirely accurate. This was an extremely narrowly scoped question, and it didn't go to the brave protesters raising really important climate issues at the front of Parliament House this morning.
Given the damage done to the building, Senator McKim, I'll assume you're talking about a protest rather than an illegal act. Senator Hume, Senator McKim, while you were only speaking for 7 seconds, I'm reluctant to call a minister before the first full stop in their answer, but you've reminded the minister. I call Senator Hume to continue.
Thank you, Mr President. I don't think that the Environment Minister would make any apology for defending this government, the Australian people, against climate vandals, which are the people that defaced government property this morning.
Senator McKim.
That you have just called heroes.
Senator Hume, I'm going to ask you to turn to the Minister, Senator McKim's question. I'm not going to instruct you how to answer it, but he has reminded you of it. Senator Hume.
Thank you again, Mr President, but I tell you I'm unclear as exactly what Senator McKim's question is. Does the Environment Minister owe—
On a point of order, Senator McKim, question time is not meant to be interactive. I'm going to, unless you're raising a point of order on relevance.
Well, I am raising a point of order on relevance, Chair. So this is the third attempt that the minister has made, and on none of those attempts has she come anywhere near addressing a very simple question.
Senator McKim, on the first point of order, when the minister is speaking for 7 seconds, I'm not going to rule a minister as not being relevant at that point, because I haven't had an opportunity to hear what they're going to say. Senator Hume, to continue.
Thank you again, Mr President. I think I now understand what it is that Senator McKim is trying to get to. It's nothing to do with the climate criminals that painted slogans all over the Parliament House this morning. It's nothing to do with the climate criminals that painted slogans all over the Lodge this morning. It's nothing to do with the climate criminals. This is my understanding, Mr President.
Senator Hume. Senator McKim, on your point of order, I'm assuming you're going to make it on direct relevance.
Well, I am, Chair, and I just want to make the point, the submission to you, that Senator Hume is coming perilously close to disrespecting your rulings.
When it comes to interjections across the chamber, I think there are dozens of senators that disrespect my rulings. Senator Hume, I am going to ask you to turn to the question asked by Senator McKim rather than repeat what the question might not be. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President. So I am assuming, Senator McKim, that what it is that you're trying to refer to is the case that is currently before the courts, the Sharma and Oars versus the Environment Minister case. Is that correct, Senator McKim? Thank you very much. That the minister has a duty of care to young people regarding climate change. So, Mr President, on the 27th of May 2021, the Federal Court delivered a judgment declining to grant an injunction preventing the Minister for Environment from approving the Vickery Extension project. On the 8th of July 2021, the Federal Court made final orders and provided further reasons in the matter. The Court declared that the Minister for the Environment owed
Senator Hume, I have Senator McKim on a point of order. Senator McKim.
Thank you, President. The point of order is again on relevance. I make the point that my question did not reference the case that Minister Hume is referring to. We are now 3/4 of the way through the time allotted. The question is very simple. Does the Minister for Environment owe Australia's children a duty of care?
I'll take Senator Birmingham before I rule on the point of order. Senator Birmingham.
Just on the point of order, Mr President, and whilst interjections are of course always disorderly, sometimes they can help to clarify matters in the chamber, and I distinctly heard when Senator Hume started to reference the case and posed it in the question of, I assume this case is what the question is referring to, I heard cries of yes coming from the Australian Greens corner. So I fail to see how Senator McKim can now suggest that Senator Hume is somehow not being directly relevant to the question he asked, of which it sounds like he and his team confirmed she was being directly relevant.
Order. There are definitely, on the point of order, I'm sorry, I can't take points of order remotely under the provisions for remote participation. I think, is that you, Senator Thorpe? My apologies. On the point of order, when Senator Hume did reference that case, I definitely did see nods and hear acknowledgements of finally from part of the chamber. That happens to be down your end, Senator McKim. You are asking me, however, I think given that this matter is in the public domain, I can't instruct a minister how to answer the question, and I believe in this sense she is being directly relevant by turning to this particular issue. There's an opportunity to debate the question answer after question time, but she is being directly relevant. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President. So the Court, Senator McKim, the Court declared that the Minister for the Environment owed a duty to take reasonable care to avoid causing personal injury or death to young people in Australia arising from emissions of carbon dioxide to the Earth's atmosphere and determining the Vickery Extension project. But on the 16th of July 2021, the Minister for the Environment filed a notice of appeal and is seeking an expedited hearing for that. The Minister for the Environment and the government take very seriously their responsibilities under the Act to protect the environment and, in doing so, the interests of all Australians. But as the matter is before the court, it would be inappropriate to comment on this case any further.
Senator McKim, supplementary question.
Thank you, President. Minister, given your previous answer and your assertion that the minister has appealed Justice Bromberg's recent finding that, in fact, she does owe a duty of care to Australia's children to provide them with a safe climate, why does the minister believe that she does not owe Australia's children a duty of care to provide them with a safe climate into the future?
Order. Order. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President. In appealing the judge's finding about the impact of greenhouse gas emissions, the minister does not dispute that our climate is in fact changing. The notice of appeal simply raises a point of legal argument. Some of the factual findings that the judge made were not based on the evidence before him.
Senator McKim, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, President. The appeal papers lodged by the minister, in fact, and I will quote directly from them, argue that Justice Bromberg erred in finding that the minister owed a duty to take reasonable care to avoid causing personal injury or death to persons under the age of 18 arising from the emissions of carbon dioxide. Given the IPCC report released last night, how can you possibly look Australia's children in the eye and argue that you don't owe them a duty of care?
Senator Hume.
Possibly look any Australian in the eye and say what happened this morning at Parliament House was not a crime. A crime. Duty of care. That was a crime.
Order.
And you're defending them, Senator McKim. You're defending them.
Senators McKim and Whish-Wilson. Senator Whish-Wilson, at least pretend to abide by the standing orders rather than act with mock outrage to show contempt for the Senate. This place works when there is a modicum of responsibility in the way we act. Senator Hume, have you concluded your answer? You've concluded your answer. Senator Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne. Can the minister update the Senate on maritime security threats in the Middle East region?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Smith for his question. Mr President, the Australian government unequivocally condemns the armed drone attack on the civilian tanker MV Mercer Street in waters off Oman, which has been attributed to Iran. Iran's reckless, unlawful, deliberate and targeted attack on a merchant vessel is a clear violation of international law. Australia offers its sincere condolences to the families and friends of the British and Romanian citizens who were killed in this attack, conducted by a drone that was filled with explosives and deliberately flown into the bridge of the tanker. Iran's denials of responsibility for the attack are not credible, Mr President. The Australian government fully supports calls for this Iranian escalation of attacks on civilian shipping to be addressed by the United Nations. Such attacks are now a lethal risk to all international merchant shipping in the region. Iran's deliberate attacks on shipping, whether from limpet mines or drones or any other means, must cease, and those responsible for giving orders and carrying out the attacks must be held to account. That the MV Mercer Street also had connections to Israel makes this act more concerning. Iran's shadow war continuing against the State of Israel breaches every foundational principle of the international community of nations and the key obligations of all member states of the United Nations. It is appropriate for the United Nations to address this conduct and its impact on regional stability and the disruption of peace, Mr President.
Senator Smith, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the minister advise the Senate on other threats to regional stability in the Middle East?
Senator Payne.
Mr President, yesterday
the 9th of August, marked 76 years since the last use of atomic weapons in armed conflict at Nagasaki. The resolve of the international community to prevent the acquisition and use of nuclear weapons has grown year on year. Today, more than ever, the global community insists on compliance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and supports the inspection and verification work of the International Atomic Energy Agency. The Australian government calls on Iran to work in good faith with the parties, including to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, to return to compliance with the NPT, to allow complete IAEA verification of its peaceful intentions for nuclear technology and to reverse its steps towards weapons-grade nuclear material.
Senator Smith, final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the minister advise of other concerns in the Middle East?
Senator Payne.
Mr President, against last week's anniversary of the tragic port explosion in Beirut, which we marked here in this chamber, Hezbollah chose to launch a number of rocket attacks into Israel. Israel made proportionate responses, Mr President. Hezbollah's use of villages as human shields is against international law, and in this regard, the courageous actions of Lebanese civilians to stop one of the Hezbollah mobile rocket launchers from escaping is worthy of public recognition. This action resulted in the arrest of the terrorists. Iran's well-documented supply of funds and weapons to terror organisations like the Hamas Brigades, Islamic Jihad and others fuels instability and violence, Mr President, and Australia joins international calls for Iran to also cease the abuses of human rights inside Iran, particularly the persecution of religious minorities, including the Baha'i, Sunni Muslims, Christians and Zoroastrians, amongst others.
Senator O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. Reports indicate that Mr Morrison will pursue freedom incentives, and Mr Morrison has said that Australians who have a vaccine will have vaccine certificates by October this year. Does this minister support vaccine certificates? And does he support these certificates being mandatory for air travel within Australia and overseas?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I thank Senator O'Neill for her question. There's a few things that are relevant to that question. It is important that um, be in a position to be able to provide a form of proof of vaccination. The importance of that is likely to be the case for a number of reasons, not just medical reasons. That's why the government has been working in terms of the technology to enable people to be able to download their vaccine certificate as part of their Apple Wallet technology platforms, for example. It's also why work is underway for high security proof of vaccination linkage to passport-type documents for international travel. A number of countries of the world have made it clear already that vaccination may be an important part or a requirement in relation to entry to their nations in the future, and so Australians will likely need and require that sort of technology and support to be able to make proof of vaccination and demonstrate that as part of their travels and their engagements. In terms of requirements in relation to vaccination in Australia and for domestic travel, airlines themselves, some have indicated that they expect this to be a requirement for travel. Those are at this stage commercial decisions. Governments have made certain decisions in relation to certain workforces, especially those such as aged care sectors, where public health orders could be used in relation to vaccination. And once again, having effective proof of vaccination may well be a relevant consideration for people in those workforce environments, or also for those perhaps visiting aged care facilities or the like in the future, which is why having such technology available is important, Mr President.
Senator O'Neill, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Senator Canavan has declared, and I quote, "I'm dead set against any vaccine passports. I know many of my Nationals colleagues will not be supporting any kind of rollout of vaccine passports in this country." Does this minister agree with Senator Canavan?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'll let Senator Canavan speak for himself, particularly in relation to the fact that I think you would find there is some distinction between what some may declare vaccine passports to be, or some extension that some may make to what they believe vaccine passports could be used for, versus what the reality may end up being in terms of how they are applied or used. I would hope that all Australians understand, in terms of the way I have explained the likely need for technology platforms that can provide proof of vaccination as being a sensible thing for people to have, to be able, as I say, to facilitate their ability to travel internationally in the future in what are likely to be changed circumstances, to be able to work in sectors where there are requirements for vaccination, or to be able to meet other potential public health requirements that states or territories may impose to continue to successfully manage COVID-19.
Senator O'Neill, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. When discussing vaccine certificates, Liberal Senator Alex Antic said, and I quote, "The Nuremberg Code arises in the ashes of World War II, where I suppose there were medical procedures being done on people against their will. And you know, it's a very, very slippery slope that we get into if we start doing this." Does this minister agree with Senator Antic?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. Mr. President, I can't say that I'd heard that quote until the senator used it.
Order.
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Thank you. I want to emphasise, because the quote suggests perhaps a misunderstanding, that there's going to be some compulsion for people to have a vaccine. The government's always been very clear that Australians will face a choice in relation to getting vaccinated. We do urge all Australians to exercise that choice. We urge all Australians to exercise that choice. And, Mr. President, I'm very pleased that some 234,899 Australians turned out yesterday as part of the vaccination program, pushing the number of people and vaccine doses administered to some 13.958 million people across Australia. And that, Mr. President, is a demonstration of the momentum that is building across a rollout that has now seen 44.7% of those
Birmingham,
aged over 16 receive at least their first dose.
Senator Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is for the Minister for International Development and the Pacific, Senator Selja. Can the minister advise the Senate on how Australia is supporting the economic needs of our partners in the Pacific and Timor-Leste as we chart our way back from COVID-19 pandemic together?
Minister for International Development and the Pacific, Senator Selja.
Well, thank you. Yes, I can. The pandemic continues to have a profound impact on Australia's economy, as it does on our Pacific and Southeast Asian neighbours. Now, economic recovery is a shared challenge, and we must face it together. Australia has continued to be a strong and steadfast partner to nations in our region throughout the pandemic, and all Australians, I think, can be proud of the significant support we are providing to our friends and neighbours. The economies of the Pacific, especially those reliant on tourism, are suffering badly. Australia is committed to supporting our Pacific family and is ready to respond to new challenges as part of our Pacific Step Up. Now, through our Partnerships for Recovery, the government has made our highest ever contribution to Pacific development in 2020-21, providing an estimated $1.7 billion to the region. Now, our funding is supporting the twin goals of health and economic recovery in the Pacific. The funding delivers critical financing to the Pacific and Timor-Leste to help mitigate fiscal crises, maintain essential health services, sustain aviation connectivity and protect the most vulnerable people. Our funding is providing direct financial support to Fiji's budget, which is bolstering social protection schemes for those in need. In PNG, we are supporting a new child nutrition grant, the first social protection payment of its type to be introduced. We've also restarted Pacific labour initiatives to boost economic activity and incomes for Pacific families, as well as to support our farmers and industries meet critical workforce needs. Australia has also directly facilitated the delivery of over 1 million vaccine doses which will reach $1.5 million by the end of this week, and over 100 tonnes of humanitarian supplies on more than 400 Australian-supported flights. Our commitment and support to the Pacific and Timor-Leste is deep and enduring, and will always support our Pacific family in their time of need.
Senator Patterson, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How is Australia working with nations in our region to deliver world-class infrastructure to support long-term economic recovery and grow future prosperity in our region?
Senator Selja.
Well, thank you. Well, through grants and loans provided by the Australian Infrastructure Financing Facility for the Pacific, the Australian government continues to invest in high-quality and transformative infrastructure projects across the Pacific. We're helping Pacific nations to deliver projects that they have identified as priorities for their people, and we are lending on sustainable terms that will not add further debt distress to their budgets. Now, in Palau, we are financing the Palau submarine cable, which will see fast, reliable, high-speed internet connecting Palau to the world. The Tina River hydropower and transmission system in the Solomon Islands will deliver large-scale clean energy for Honiara and surrounding communities. And in PNG, I recently announced Australian support for the redevelopment of PNG's major ports and the transnational highway, truly nation-building infrastructure which will transform PNG's trade-based economy. Now, with a future AIFFP investment pipeline of over $1 billion, Australia is more committed than ever to working with Pacific nations to support them in their...
Senator Patterson, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How is Australian support contributing to economic stability and job creation throughout the Pacific, as well as for Australian businesses?
Senator Selja.
Well, thank you. Now, supporting the region's economic recovery is critical to Australia's own recovery and to securing jobs both in Australia and across the Pacific. On Pacific labour programs, are high priorities for nations in our region, and indeed is one of Australia's highest priorities for the Pacific. Now, through the Pacific Labour Scheme and the Seasonal Worker Program, we're providing valuable employment opportunities to more than 14,000 Pacific and Timor-Leste workers, which is not just boosting the workers' incomes, but helping to stimulate the economies of the region. These workers are meeting the critical workforce needs of hundreds of Australian businesses in a range of sectors, including horticulture, meat processing, tourism and aged care, just to name a few. And as the Prime Minister announced on Friday at the Pacific Island Forum Leaders meeting, we will double the number of Pacific workers in Australia between now and March next year. This is all part of our plan to secure the economic recovery and protect jobs both in Australia and across the region.
Senator Lambie.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is for the Minister representing the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction, Minister Seselja. Senator, it's no secret that I've been sceptical about climate change in the past. I used to think all this stuff about climate change was absolute rubbish. That was only in 2017. Since then, I've listened and I've watched and I've changed my mind. And I think a lot of people like me have changed their minds about climate change too. Because anyone can see that the weather we're getting now is not natural. And that report from the IPCC yesterday should scare the hell out of us. Senator, unless something changes, we're going to hit 1.5 degrees of warming within 2 decades. It is time for your government to stand up and admit that you were wrong too. Will you admit that we need to change tack here and do something very different to stop this from happening, or at least slowing it down?
The Minister representing the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction, Senator Seselja.
Well, thank you very much, Mr President. I thank Senator Lambie for her question. There is no doubt that the Australian government takes the issue of climate change and emissions reductions very seriously, and I'm pleased that Senator Lambie is calling for action. But I can take Senator Lambie and the Senate through some of the measures that we actually are taking, which demonstrate how seriously we take this issue. So, when Australia makes commitments to reduce emissions, unlike perhaps some other nations, we take those very seriously and we deliver on those commitments. It's not just about making a commitment, it is about delivering it. So between 2005 and 2019, between 2020, we reduced our emissions by 20%. Now, we look around the world, there are many countries in the OECD. In fact, the average is about 9%, so we're about double the emissions reductions of advanced economies. If you look at the G20, about half of G20 economies have seen their emissions increase during that period. So we take that very seriously. We take seriously our investment in renewables, which, when we see in relation to solar, is at the highest levels in the world on a per capita basis, much higher on a per capita basis than other countries. And I hear the interjections from the Greens senators there, always making a constructive contribution on behalf of their activist arm that we saw outside Parliament vandalising this place today. But unlike the Greens, we actually believe that when you take these measures, you need to do it in an economically responsible way. One of the other areas we are doing is we are supporting climate resilience in the Pacific. We are doing that through significant investments of hundreds of millions of dollars. If we were to take the Greens' advice and destroy our economy tomorrow on the altar of their climate goals, we wouldn't be able to support our Pacific partners. So we're doing our bit. We're working with our international partners to lower emissions, to see more investment in renewables, but we'll do it in a way that is sustainable for our economy and jobs as well.
Order on my left. Order. Senator Lambie, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. France and Sweden replaced their whole coal fleet with nuclear power, and they now have the lowest per capita carbon emissions in the world. Meanwhile, we've got nearly a third of the world's uranium here, but for some reason we won't use it ourselves. This government says that we can cut Australia's emissions using technology, not taxes. If you're actually serious about that, will the government consider replacing our coal-fired power stations with nuclear power?
Senator Seselja.
I'm hearing less hears from the Greens for that question in relation to nuclear power. But look, when it comes to that issue, and I thank Senator Lambie for the question. Senator Lambie would be aware that there is a moratorium on nuclear generation in this country, and of course we believe as a government that any changes to that would require bipartisan support. There's been a blanket anti-nuclear stance from the Labor Party, I think, since the 1970s. So what we've said in relation to this technology, like all technologies, we are watching developments. Last year the Morrison government released Australia's technology investment roadmap. In the roadmap, small modular reactors are identified as a watching brief technology. There is no doubt that we need to take action in this space, but when it comes to the issue of nuclear, we all know that when you have a blanket ban on one side of politics, and given the long lead times that are needed for this type of investment, we know that there are significant challenges to the ability to look at that type of technology. But when it comes to other moves, we're doing it through renewables, and we're doing it through a technology, not taxes approach, which is where we're going to be taking it into the future.
Senator Lambie, a final supplementary question.
In 2015, I did a fuel security, and the biggest thing we had was nuclear power, and it was made very clear it would be a 10-year turnaround. We're still sitting here now 6 years later, and the Liberal Party is still on, hasn't even got past the first base of doing anything about nuclear power. So please stop the wishy-washy and can get up and give me an explanation of what you intend to do when we own nearly 1/3 of the world's uranium and you're still sitting on your butts and not doing anything about nuclear power for this country.
Senator Seselja.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Lambie. I think I largely addressed your second supplementary in the answer to your first supplementary. So I don't know that there's much I can add, and certainly not much that I could add which would satisfy your answer. But what I would say is this. When it comes to taking action on climate change, reducing emissions, we always have to take a very practical, real-world approach, and that is what this government has always sought to do. It is taking the issue seriously, but it is also recognising that if we don't work for global action with countries right around the world, if we don't work to support existing industries, if we don't make sure that we have strong baseload power to deliver, then our economy would go backwards. We would see jobs shed, and it would all be for naught if we are sacrificing our economy and not actually seeing it move the dial when it comes to the environment. So we take a very responsible approach which balances all of these realities as laid out in earlier answers.
Billick, remotely.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. The Morrison government has sent more than 11,000 debt notices for $32 million to social welfare recipients who receive JobKeeper. How much of the $13 billion in JobKeeper payments it paid to companies who saw an increase in profit has the Morrison government sought to recover?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. I thank Senator Billick for the question. Mr. President, it's important, as always, that where programs are operated and claims have been made against the guidelines, conditions or eligibility of those programs, that steps are made to recover those funds. That's the case in relation to JobKeeper, like any other program. And whilst Senator Billick, you have chosen to highlight one component of the recovery activity, and that is in relation to individuals who may have been in receipt of other payments, such as JobSeeker, whilst also receiving JobKeeper. It is also the case that the Australian Taxation Office has been pursuing significant instances of overclaims, overpayments or inappropriate claims with businesses. In fact, as of August, some $296.6 million has been identified by the Australian Taxation Office with Australian businesses, and the government takes very seriously recovering those funds as well. Approximately $185.5 million of those funds has been recovered to date. So, Mr. President, on all of these fronts, what we are assessing against is the eligibility of businesses or individuals to the payments they received according to the guidelines at the time. It shouldn't be confused at all, Mr. President, of course, with some of the claims people make about receipt of JobKeeper, which was entirely within the guidelines as they existed at the time. And those programs, that program in particular, has been identified by the Reserve Bank to have saved around 700,000 Australian jobs, Mr. President. A crucial program in terms of keeping businesses afloat during a time when right across Australia they were having their doors shut, and in having the doors shut, of course, they were faced with the proposition of having to stand down their staff. JobKeeper avoided that, and it helped to ensure Australians kept their jobs and our economy was in the strongest possible position for recovery.
Billick, a supplementary question.
Will the Morrison government seek to compulsorily recover a single dollar of the $13 billion of taxpayer money it paid to companies despite them seeing an increase in earnings during the pandemic?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. I'm hoping that I heard all of Senator Billick's question correctly there, and because part of the reason why I'm not sure whether I did, because I think I answered Senator Billick's question in the primary question, that in terms of the government seeking to recover funds from Australian businesses—
Order, Senator. I have Senator Wong on a point of order. Senator Wong.
Point of order. If I could, direct relevance, but perhaps I could assess. It was compulsorily recover.
Senator Birmingham, to continue.
So, in terms of recovering funds from Australian businesses and compulsory recovering funds from any Australian businesses that made inappropriate claims, the Australian Taxation Office has the power to be able to pursue and to recover funds where necessary. As always, we use the powers judiciously, be they individuals or businesses, and where possible, repayment plans are negotiated or agreed between parties. As said in the primary question, some $296.6 million in overpayments have been identified. Many of these were honest mistakes, but nonetheless $185.5 million has been recovered, and the government will continue to pursue recovery of the residual
Senator
amount.
Birmingham. Senator Billick, a final supplementary question.
While it's hounding social welfare recipients for $32 million, the Morrison government is happy to leave $13 billion in the pockets of companies that saw an increase in earnings, and is happy to use $660 million of taxpayers' money for car park courts like it's Liberal Party money. When it comes to spending taxpayers' money, why is it one rule for those struggling on social welfare and another rule for everybody else?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. And I note Senator Billick saying, why is it one rule for some and another for others? Well, I can't help but think, Mr. President, why is it the Labor Party pick on some but not others? Why is it, of course, that they're after businesses or they're after religious organisations, but they overlook the millions of dollars that trade unions also received? That they overlook the millions of dollars that trade unions received? So why is it that they're so selective in terms of who it is that they hate, who it is that they wish to vilify? The simple facts are that Australian businesses were having their doors slammed shut last year right across the country, in every state, in every territory, as lockdowns and shutdowns occurred. JobKeeper was born with the simplest of eligibility criteria to seek to make it easy to save those jobs. It worked. It saved 700,000 jobs. We're not going to vilify the businesses who were legitimately able to claim it, but I do note the hypocrisy of those who seem to overlook the trade unions who are happy to take the cash.
Birmingham. Order. Order. Senator Van.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts, my fellow Victorian Senator, Senator Hume. Can the Minister advise the Senate how the Liberal and Nationals government is supporting businesses to access cheaper and faster broadband as part of our plan to chart Australia's way back from the COVID-19 pandemic?
Minister representing the Minister for Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts, Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Van for the question and for his enduring interest in the connectivity and connection of all Australians to the NBN network. Mr President, I am extraordinarily pleased to confirm that NBN Co will establish an additional 44 business fibre zones, providing access to ultra-fast business-grade broadband at reduced prices for an additional 60,000 businesses in Australia. Following this announcement, NBN Co will now have a network of 284 business fibre zones nationally.
Senator
That
O'Neill.
will cover 850,000 businesses. No, I'll happily take the interjection.
Senator
I'll
O'Neill.
happily take this interjection, Mr President, because this government will not be lectured to by those opposite on the NBN. This government has delivered the NBN efficiently and economically when Australians needed it the most. In fact, today there are over 11.97 million premises ready to connect. 99% of Australian premises can now order an NBN service. More than 8.2 million premises have already connected to the NBN, and 75% of homes and businesses are on 50 megabits or higher plans. In fact, following this announcement, the NBN Co will have a network of 284 business fibre zones nationally, covering over 850,000 businesses. Now, as
Senator
well as
O'Neill.
extending the business fibre zones footprint, NBN Co is further discounting its already competitive wholesale prices for business-grade broadband in order to support more business access, dedicated business-grade fibre services. New and existing businesses within business fibre zones will benefit from further wholesale pricing reductions of up to 37%. And for a business already within an NBN Co business fibre zone, this morning's announcement means savings of as much as $1,800 each and every year.
Order.
Businesses within those business fibre zones will benefit from access to NBN Co's premium business-grade product Enterprise Ethernet at no upfront cost, as well as CBD equivalent pricing, irrespective of where the business is located.
Senator Van, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, what do NBN Co's promising financial results that were announced today mean for Australians?
Senator Hume.
Thank you
Senator
again.
O'Neill,
Thank
let
you
the
again,
minister
Mr.
start
President.
before you interject. Senator Hume.
Thank you again, Mr President. Well, I am extremely pleased to welcome NBN Co's announcements of its strong connection performance and the financial results for the 2020 and 2021 financial year. As I said earlier, there are now nearly 12 million premises ready to connect to the NBN. There have been 930,000 new connections in the year, with a total of 8.2 million premises now connected. Now, this represents around a 13% increase on last year. Revenue has been growing as more households and more businesses are using the NBN for high-speed broadband, and it's extremely pleasing to see that 17% of premises have chosen their plans from their retailer that provide download speeds of 100 megabits per second or even higher. The NBN Co is now generating positive operating earnings as measured by EBITDA, measured by earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortisation, and is in fact now $1.35 billion for the
Senator
year,
Hume.
which is a turnaround of $2 billion.
Senator Van, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, how will NBN Co look to further improve the connectivity experience for Australians?
Senator Hume.
Mr President,
Senator
NBN Co is
O'Neill.
now entering a new growth phase and is making new investments to provide even better broadband to all Australians. NBN Co is now focused on its $4.5 billion network investment plan to deliver gigabit capacity or capability on demand to 75% of premises in the fixed-line network as soon as 2023. In fact, by calendar year end, the company plans to initiate a small volume launch of fibre-to-the-node and fibre-to-the-premise upgrades, making up to 10,000 premises eligible to access the NBN Co's home ultra-fast plans, offering download speeds of up to 1 gigabit per second. It's forecast that 75% of premises on the fixed-line network, or around 8 million premises, will be able to access the highest speed home ultra-fast services as soon as 2023.
Order. Senator Hume. Senator Siewert.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, my question is to the Minister for Government Services, Minister Reynolds. Minister, the government has issued 11,771 people with a debt notice after a review of their income support payments and any JobKeeper income that were paid to them by their employer. Have people in lockdown in New South Wales, Victoria and recently in Queensland received these debt notices, and when did they receive them?
The Minister for Government Services, Senator Reynolds.
Much, Mr. President, and I thank the senator for her question. As those in this chamber know, it is the long-standing principle of Australia's social security system that people should be paid correctly according to their individual circumstances. The process ensures our social security system is sustainable into the future because it means that taxpayers only pay recipients what they're eligible for, no more and no less. It's the responsibility of people receiving the job seeker payment or other related social security repayments to report their employment income correctly and accurately to Services Australia, and that includes if they were also receiving JobKeeper in addition to job seeker. Services Australia communicated widely, including through the agency website and social media channels, to inform customers of their obligation to report JobKeeper income as income and how it could impact the remainder of their income support. Around 79,000 individuals were identified as being at risk of incurring an overpayment as they were declaring minimal income and were contacted by Services Australia from July last year, that is 2020. When a person is overpaid, my agencies will always write to them to let them know how much they were overpaid and
Senator
explain
Reynolds,
why they
Senator
owe the money.
Siewert on order. Senator O'Neill. Senator Siewert on a point of order.
Point of order. I did specifically ask about the number of people in lockdown that have received debt notices, and I appreciate the minister's additional information, but I particularly want to know about that.
You've reminded the minister of that part of the question. I have been listening carefully, and until this point, I do consider the information to be being provided to be directly relevant to the subject of the question. You've reminded the minister, though, of that part of the question. I call the minister to continue.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And in this case, given the complexity and the importance of this issue, I think that the context is vitally important. So, if someone was in receipt of both JobKeeper payment and an income support payment, they needed to report the JobKeeper payment amount like any other employment income, and this was always very clear to recipients. Under JobKeeper, so just make it very clear also that no individual has had to pay back JobKeeper, whereas Senator Birmingham has already clarified that 296 million has been identified as being overpaid to businesses.
Order. Senator Reynolds. Senator Siewert, supplementary question.
Thank you. I still don't know how many people in lockdown have these notices. Did the government give any consideration to the fact that people who receive these payments may now be unemployed and continue to be experiencing financial distress?
Senator Reynolds.
Look, thank you very much, Mr. President. And I presume what you're talking about is last year during JobKeeper, when that was active, because obviously we have improved the system of payments from the COVID disaster payment process. But as at the 30th of April, if that is the case, Senator Siewert, as of the 30th of April this year, 11,771 customers had a debt raised after completion of their JobKeeper compliance review, which totals around $32.8 million, and this work is ongoing. And as always, if clients are in financial distress or have other problems, they can always talk to Services Australia to seek some relief.
Senator Seawood, a final supplementary question.
The government claims that both JobSeeker and JobKeeper programs have strong compliance frameworks, yet you have gone after those on income support as per usual and let billionaires like Gerry Harvey off the hook. When will you issue billionaires like Gerry Harvey with debt notices?
Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And can I just completely reject the premise of that question? And it's been very interesting. Labor have been deliberately conflating the repayment of JobKeeper payments that were due back from businesses in terms of compliance activities and individuals. So the fact is, as I've just said, $296 million has been identified in overpayments to businesses and $185 million has been recovered from businesses so far. And while I'm at it, you might like to also ask Labor, because unions received $22 million worth of JobKeeper, and I bet you not a single cent of that has been repaid. And in fact, $7.4 million of the union's JobKeeper money went straight to the Labor Party. So how about asking them about the unions and their payments that they would have received from JobKeeper payments themselves?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Mr President, I ask that further questions be placed on notice, but I